about Mouz first, because obviously we talked about Phaser when they won the other one. Like, obviously, this is basically confirmed that they've been able to just keep going what they were able to do at the end of CSGO. Like, it looks awesome so far, man.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really, really liked what I saw from Mouz overall. It doesn't seem like the wins they've gathered under their belt in CSGO have led them to rest on their laurels, which is something that I was a little bit afraid of. It doesn't seem like that at all. They seem very hungry. They seem very invested, very involved in all of the games they were playing. And they still have that kind of momentum that is going with them right now. I think, honestly, what they did in CSC was what they needed to do, right? I'm not going to just break out the fireworks right now. It's what they needed to do. We came to an event where the final was supposed to be FaZe v Mouz. So you look at the playing field, and whatever standing situations and the quality of the teams, they needed to be in the grand final, and they did that. The main headlight, as far as I'm concerned, is that Yimpat might just end up being one of the best anchors for the next years to come. I know it might be a little bit big of a statement right now, but the quality of what I'm seeing from this young guy, event after event now, leads me to believe that, holy shit, like we might have something very special in our hands. Because Pro League in itself was already kind of a warning sign, but you could say, hey, that's one event, that's maybe a flash in the pan. It was a small kind of studio environment in Malta. It wasn't really a big LAN. It wasn't really a kind of an audience. There was some caveat you could put to it, but now it's actually back-to-back LAN events where he has almost MVP-like numbers with the positions that he plays. Shit, like that, he is something. I think they really found something special in this player, and he continues to deliver. So for me, that's the huge positive. There are some negatives, and we can touch on them if you want. There are some negatives, but the big positive for me is Yimpat and the quality of CS he's putting out.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, obviously, I did the thing like everyone did, where I just called him Jim Fat for like a first month and a half. It's partly Yimpat, because obviously he's Finnish, so they have like a weird way of where they put the emphasis on the word. I agree, mate. The crazy thing is, after the first tournament run, it was one of the most obvious people whose stat line was like, well, they can't do this again. Come on, like, look, it's ridiculous. Like, and you look at the role they play, it really is like a fucking anchor doing like sort of spots people don't want to play or that are more tricky. But the thing is, this is where there's something weird about Counter-Strike. I mean, I have to compare it to sports in games like football, where one of the weirdest things about sports is, I know in basketball, they often say like there's a thing called like basketball IQ. And the reason they try and say it like that, Maniac, is because some people who actually in real life would sound like an idiot to you, they wouldn't seem very cerebral. Sometimes in the game, they just have an insane like sort of mental understanding of how to play and where to be. And that sort of, like, I mean, an example I often give in CS is, to me, when I say Shox is a genius, I mean like intuitively he seems like a genius. I don't really think if I sat him down and asked him to explain to me, I don't think he'd like Blade and he would do it and make it amazing. But if I look at what he does in the game, some of his decision making, it's almost like the joke is, it's like he's reading the Matrix at times in those clutches. Like, how's he knowing where to go? The Jim Hat guy has this. Like, not like a Shox, obviously, but in the sense of like, when you get a player, the most comparable example I can give is when Perfecto came along, right? When these players come along and they haven't played properly at tier 1, and then you see them have like this style where it's not like they're just fragging everyone. They're playing like smart, and they have like areas where they're actually even more disciplined than like top pros sometimes. You're just like, where was this guy? Like, this guy was just playing on some team nowhere. No one saw this. Like, it's actually crazy. Like, I know obviously the hype with this guy is he's fucking Sergei's younger brother. Sergei's brother. But like, mate, that when you say that to me for all those years, that just sounds like he's got mad skills. You know, like when we heard about Nevera coming from Screen, you think, right, his mechanics must be sick. If no one told me he was this sort of player, though, like this actually looks like the sort of player who, I mean, this is why it's perfect for Mouz. Is like, this is like what you call like found money. Like, there's no way you should even have this on a team like Mouz. Like I say, this guy actually looks pretty well formed already, and we're talking about what, like his second like real tier 1 LAN or something. Like, actually, after these first couple, look, obviously if he maintains it, it'll be like one of the greatest of all time, but like, it just looks insanely promising, insanely at the moment. Yeah,
and he's got what's really scary about him is that it feels like he's got the 3 most important boxes already checked out, which means he plays good cerebral Counter-Strike, he makes good clutch decisions, and mechanically speaking, he's strong. And it's really rare to come along a rookie that has all of these. Like, so usually it's just one of these that's kind of interesting, and you think, oh, I see potential here. Like, this guy's definitely skilled, but you know, in clutches he seems a little bit lost, and he makes a few mistakes, but he's going to be fine. He seems to have already everything. He's very clever in the decisions he makes, specifically in defense. Honestly, the defense is where I think his true value is insane. Like how he plays his roles, very, very relatable to Rob's on the CD side. Not on the T side. I would put it 1-to-1. I think Rob's impact on the T side is unmatched right now in the lurks and like the space he takes. But how reliable this guy is on the CT side, like I honestly think there's only really Rob's that's in that contention for same conversation. Like the amount of security he brings you, and the fact that whenever he finds himself in a 1v1, 1v2 at the end, you can still trust really he's going to have a good shot. Oh, Jesus Christ. So now that's the positive. And if this is a level that is going to be maintained in the next few months and or years, let's be hopeful here, then yeah, I think we might have one of the greatest for CS2 already now. I really don't see a whole lot of players who can keep up with him. Now, here comes the negative. I've seen two things in this grand final that I worried about in the past that I didn't know whether that was going to weather or not, but it stayed on. I really think that Torji kind of missed out on the grand final, and I think Frozen was not the Frozen that we like to see. And I know there's this conversation, we can kind of divide it, we can dissect it. On one hand, you have Frozen, and there is a bit of a tug of war between, you know, pundits and whatever. Some people say he's one of the greatest rifle, and I am a little bit more reserved because I do think his numbers are great, but I still think there's this last sort of step. And these are the kind of matches where the last step is kind of needed. When you have a superstar like that, if we want to put him in the same category as the Nikos, the Zywus, the Simple, the Robs now, if we want to put him in this category, then we cannot be lenient with that performance in the grand final. That's a give and take, right? If you want to have that position in that conversation, then you can't have a grand final where you go missing and you're pedestrian compared to what you can do. That was a little bit sad because prior to that, he had great numbers. I think he walked into the grand final with.
Oh, he could have been the MVP for sure.
Yeah, he was in MVP contention walking into the grand final, and it's more than just stats. It's the eye test. Looking at a player who's suddenly a little bit more undecisive, a bit more hesitant in his move, that doesn't really take the same kind of risks. That is really something I hope they're working on, because if he unlocks that last step, then yeah, I mean his name is going to be up there in the conversation. And the Torji point, yeah, he kind of floated through that grand final without having any kind of impact. It wasn't a great event for him overall. I still say that he's better now than he was prior to Shuhei joining Mouz. I think this narrative had some basis to it. I think there is some truth to it. I'm not going to challenge it. But this was a little bit rough for him, and it was more of the Torji that I had seen in the past, which is basically a player, well, if things are going well, he can catch on fire. And he's had already games in CS2 where his numbers are bonkers because Mouz start winning and they're having momentum, and holy hell, he's getting in there and he's spraying people. He's decent with the rifle and all. But when you see a team that's in the rough and it's whatever, 12-12, starting overtime in the grand final, I'm not going to put my money on him to have that kind of move, to have the spine, to have the winning move when the pressure is at the max. These were the two players that let me down a little bit in the grand final, and I think are partially the reason why FaZe were able to have such a comeback. Because you also have to realize now, FaZe is slowly starting to, from a phenomenological standpoint, FaZe is starting to become something more than a team in terms of, are we going to beat these guys? And I started to see and feel that from Mouz, where it got into their head, like, wait a minute, they're doing this comeback against us now. They're about to beat us. And once you get into that area, it's almost as if you already lost the game. If you start imagining the idea that, shit, we're not going to beat these guys, they're going to do another comeback, oh my God, like they've been doing comebacks all the time. You have to be so strong to beat that, and I do believe that Mouz kind of fell in that trap in the grand final.
Yeah, on the point about the Mouz players, like, obviously, in general, all the pointers do still mark upwards. It's like, it's looking awesome. Like, right now, I mean, look, they obviously got helped by the fact that all this Rostermania stuff means there's a lot of uncertainty at the top of the scene. But all the stuff we said after Pro League, like, they really can just be like a permanent top 5 team. There's no reason why. When you look at this lineup, like, it just works. Like, and by the way, it did work from quite early on, and it's looking great so far. So, yeah, right now, I have no reason to think they won't be in position to be in semis and to contend for titles. But if you look at the players, there obviously are still flaws. Like, the main one obviously is just inexperience. Like, so I think in general, like, someone like Shuhei's doing a great job calling. Just obviously hasn't been in many finals, has he? So there's another level of IGLing there. It's a different type of decision. Like, I always think this is the reason why, in my opinion, the most deceptive match in CS is like an underdog winning a semi-final. Because the amount of time, if you play a semi-final as an underdog, you don't have the pressure and you can just do whatever you want. Like, if you lose, no one cares anyway. If you win, whatever you did will look awesome. But in a final, that call is different. different. Like the call you're making in the semis, sort of like, guys, just go for it. In the final, it's like, fuck, am I going to blow the match? Like you're thinking that. So yeah, already I think in general he's just tracking well. I'll give him a couple more chances. So same with Torji, I'll give him a slight pass in the sense that like he's barely ever been in this sort of scenario where he could win the tournament. Quite frankly, he played well in the other tournaments too. And like you say, just in general, the level has improved though. Like as long as the level overall is going up, and before these big matches, he is fairly reliable. So that's all great. I'm with you on the Frozen one. If people have ever watched my shows with Maui, they'll know that Maui is very hard pushed for Frozen for about 2 years now. In fact, he even used to, before Rops went into this like God mode period, he even used to say Frozen was better than Rops. Now, this is where we've had a point of contention, right? Because I've never agreed with him. It's kind of like what you're saying. I've always like given Frozen his due to a certain level, but I do think if we're going to compare him with like Rops right now, I do think there's a gear that Rops has that Frozen hasn't gone to. And one of the reasons why is because here's the thing. What people are forgetting is it's not the same scenario. When I looked at Frozen versus Rops when they were in Mouse Sports, right? Yeah, they were both in the lineup with Carrigan that won those titles, etc. But that was when Frozen was like 16 and he didn't even have his role set at the time. That was when Rops was already starting to get really good. Essentially, he just got reset by the online era and he was in Mouse for 2 years, wasn't he? Like, so at that point in time, I could sort of look at him on Mouse and go like, right, well, I don't know. He's obviously not in finals now, but I've seen him in them before. I have a sense that he can play them. And then it turned out my gamble was right. He was pretty good in phase. He's had some awesome results now. The problem with Frozen is I just haven't seen him go to that actual level. I always say this. It's one thing to have the potential, but it's like Zimu in the major. You have to actually do it though. You have to actually show us that you can really just make the score go to 16 rounds on the scoreboard and win the major. Like everyone had to do it, mate. It's like there was a great saying I remember back in hockey where I was watching a game from way back in the day where it was actually Wayne Gretzky, believe it or not. This is before he'd become like totally goated, and the commentator was even saying like Gretzky has to show up in this game, you know, and he was listing off all the great players in history that did, like Bobby Orr showed up when it mattered, and this guy, it's the same concept. Like it doesn't matter how good you are on paper, you have to actually do it. So that's what I'm just waiting for from Frozen. Because to me, when I look at this final here, if you think about the first CS2 tournament that we had when Elige and Complexity went off in the final, dude, if Frozen does that like Elige did, they win this tournament. Like they actually, we'd now be talking about that's the first team that did beat FaZe properly and took them down.
See more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or, you know, be a pleb and don't.